So we have some really interesting, actually, I've only did two. I was going to do three or more, but every time I think I'm going to do, well, I can do this many, there's too much that comes up that's got to be said. So, all right, let's go over what we say about miracles, so we can think about that when we're reading the scriptures. So the basic definition, a miracle is an event that seems inexplicable by natural or scientific laws and accordingly gets attributed to some supernatural cause. In other words, the miracles, I mean, we've studied the ones in the past, and we know that well, God had a hand in it, wasn't necessarily a supernatural cause. And we're going to look at that in the scriptures and the miracles that we look at tonight. And of course, miracles are the same. Miracles, wonders, works, okay, are just simple and natural works of God. Okay, so our first scripture is Exodus 14:21 through, well, it goes through, well, anyway. And Moses lifted up his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch, the Lord appeared to the Egyptian army in a pillar of fire and of cloud, and threw the Egyptian army into confusion, thus clogging their chariot wheels that they drew heavily, so that the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before the house of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against Egypt." All right, now this is what is known as Moses parting the Red Sea. Now, there's lots of information here. Oh, wait, we got to finish the scripture. Okay. And the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand and over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." And Moses lifted up his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its place when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not a single one of them, but the children of Israel walked through the sea as if they were walking on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead upon the seashore. Okay, now what I started to say before. This is what we all know, or did know, as Moses parting the Red Sea. So, first of all, though it has got into the Bible at some point that the Israelites crossed, they were in the middle of the Red Sea, and they sea parted and let them through. And scholars now say, and this is like a majority of scholars, this isn't just us now. Okay. So, I mean, the Israelites did not cross the Red Sea at all, but it got into the Bible at some point in time, and that's what it remains. Okay. They crossed at a place about 185 miles north of the main body of the Red Sea. So, so on this map, okay, all right, up here where you see Lake Timshaw, these were like shoals, and they were known as the Bitter Lakes. And so Moses, remember the land of Goshen, that's where the Hebrews settled in Egypt. All right, so instead of going all the way down, crossing the Red Sea, Moses went right here. And so what happened is there were waves, the tides, you know how the tides come in and out. Okay, so on each side of them, because the lakes had tides of a sort, and the Red Sea, the very tip of it, the tides were there too. Now, I'm not I'm not an expert on this, but the idea is you have to understand where they crossed. Okay, and it wasn't the Red Sea down here where they just split it. It was where the two kind of met, and there was, you can see how sparse it was there, but they still had the tides. And so when hold on, let's see what I got. Okay, so they talked about the wall of protection. So we'll read this a little bit, and then hopefully it will gel back. So what happened? All right, a strong east wind caused the sea to go back all night, so that the passage was dry. The water now was on both sides of the crossing place. That is, the water of the Bitter Lakes and the water at the tip of the Gulf. When the tide is high, both waters join and the shoals are submerged. So I guess technically you would say that Moses got there when it was low tide and it was dry and they crossed. But later on, it came up to high tide and there was no way that they could cross. So the Egyptians were in the midst of the passage. The wind changed. The chariot wheels were mired in the muck, and the water rushed back upon them. So just a little Aramaic here. The Aramaic word shorah means wall, and it's the same word used in speaking of a city wall, a fortification, or a fence. So metaphorically, shorah is used metaphorically to mean protection. And it is often said, he has been a wall to me, meaning that he has given me protection. God gave them protection. And I apologize, I messed up here, but that's basically the idea of the wall of protection and the way that the winds worked and the tides. All right. Now, you recall it talked about the Israelites saw God in a pillar of cloud and fire. So interesting what this really means and where it came from. Desert dwellers and expert men who lead the camels travel by means of stars and the shadows of trees and rocks. Let's not forget now, there were no signs, there were no roads in the desert, and even if there were tracks, the wind would blow it over. So you had to know, they had to know somehow to follow the stars, which they did a lot. And then it says the shadows of trees and rocks. But of course, they also traveled and their directions by the movement of the clouds, just the same as they would know the movement of the stars. So that's what they're referring to. And the fire, okay, the fire that they saw, it is believed that oil experts in Arabia believe that the Israelites saw was a glow from burning oil ignited by heat. Now, see, we know in some parts of Arabia where oil is abundant, fires are seen during the night. So cultural background of this is what they actually saw. The Israelites were depending on the clouds and the fire once they had crossed and whatnot, and the Egyptians saw this, okay? And so metaphorically, okay, that here we have this, metaphorically, it means that they saw God's glory protecting the Israelites. Okay, but an interesting background on that. And remember, they did travel by the stars, and remember the star over the manger? Okay. So let's go, okay, a miracle. Now, the actual events that we talked about, the crossing the sea, the parting of the sea, was a natural event. And it happens all the time, even now. Okay, so where do we go with this miracle? All right, we have the traditional miracle as Moses pointing this thing and in the middle of the Red Sea, and that's where they came across. So that kind of destroys that miracle, kind of. But the real miracle, okay, got a few statements here. All right, is that Moses was guided. He knew where to cross because he was able to commune with God and to seek guidance and direction from God. Now, the miracle in this instance is God's guidance. And the miracle in almost all of Jesus' miracles was God's guidance also. Moses and the Hebrews trusted in God, whereas the Egyptians trusted in their chariots and horses. The miracle in this instance was the wind, which blew all night at the right time. The people were divinely guided and therefore knew when the natural forces were in their favor. So it's the miracle is Moses and the people were guided there. So it remains a miracle because God showed, God's very much a part of it, but he showed them where to go. And And he showed them where to go. And Moses didn't just stick out his hand and it's like magic, which is the way it's viewed. No, but it did come from God. All right. And what happened was a natural situation that would occur. Now, all right. So let's move now to Exodus 16, 11 through 15. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Say to them, at evening you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. And it came to pass that at evening the quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning the dew lay round about the camp. And when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a thin round crust, like the hoar frost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, manna ho. And that means, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. All right. Now, some interesting background on this. First of all, Psalm 78 clearly spells out what happened, okay? And had rained down manna for them to eat, and had given them of the bread of heaven. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them game in abundance. God sent them game in abundance. He caused winds to blow in the skies, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He rained flesh also upon them like dust, and feathered fowls like the sands of the sea. And he let these fall in the midst of their camp, round about their tents. Now, this is real interesting also about the quail. And in Numbers, we hear and we see the same thing. And there went forth a wind from before the Lord, and brought quails from the sea, and let them fall by the camp, about a day's journey on this side, and about a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp, and about 2 cubits high upon the face of the earth. And the people rose all that day, and all that night, and all the next day. And they gathered the quails. He that gathered least gathered 10 omers, and they spread them out in the sun for themselves round about the camp. Okay, so we see this quail thing in 3 different places here. And so, but let's look at what it's talking about. Let me go back to bread for a minute. Sorry, we got a little out of line here. Now, the bread, the manna it wasn't just referring to bread, it was referring to food when they said, manna. In Aramaic, manna or manaho means, what is it? When the Israelites first saw manna, they did not know what it was. So they exclaimed, manho, what is it? Now, Manna, what the manna was, again, sent by God, but manna is white like coriander seed, and the taste of it is like honey in the comb. The Hebrews gathered it from day to day. If you want to go and read that passage, it's real interesting about how they gathered it and whatnot. The manna is gathered in early morning before it is eaten by ants and other insects or dried by the sun's rays. Now, Dr. Hold on just a sec. Okay. Dr. Lamsa has eaten manna many times, but you had to be in the right place in the desert in order to eat the manna, because it's only in certain places in the desert. And so once again, with the manna, the miracle once again is that the Israelites were led into an area where manna, I don't know what is wrong with this thing, led into an area where manna is found, okay, because it's not found it's not found in everywhere, but it is found in the desert. It is real. Dr. Lamsa has actually eating it himself. And remember, the manna, it fed the people for 6 days. All right, now let's go on to the quail. All right, the quail mentioned in the Bible. See there, this is another event. The manna did not just drop from the sky. That's what people think, that God just dropped the manna down from the sky. No, nor did God just, okay, here you go. These are natural events. The quail mentioned came from Europe and other lands to winter in the Arabian desert, just as they come today. So it's typical. Okay. Thousands of flocks of quail still winter in the warm Arabian desert. They fly from Europe by hundreds of thousands to the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea. At times they are at times they are caught by strong winds and fall exhausted on the ground. They are gathered by natives and stored for food. During the fall months, one sees large flocks of quail covering the ground for miles. So the quail came from the sea, that is, from the seashores. After the flocks had flown over the sea, they rested on the shores. Then they started again for the desert and got caught by a strong wind. And we're going to leave it at that because the rest of it is. Okay, so a natural event that even happens nowadays. And so where is our miracle again? The miracle is that God led the people to an area where the flock was going to come down exhausted. And the miracle of the quail is a divine act of God, okay? It's not anything magical. It's not, they just didn't drop out of the sky. It's what God guided Moses and the people there. And so when the people turned to God, providence not only met their needs, but healed their wounds and led them to new pastures and sources of supplies. What is important is not how the quail came, but that hungry people who craved meat were fed. And what's also interesting is if you read the rest of the scriptures, that the people, now not Moses, but the people were complaining. Remember, they came out of Egypt. All right, they had come out of Egypt, and contrary to what most people think, they said, well, they were in slavery in Egypt, but they had their own section of Egypt. And when they left Egypt, they had gold. So they were, in spite of being like slaves, so to speak, they were very well off in Egypt. Okay, and so the people were complaining and and blaming God and all that kind of stuff. And so what we have is he fed the hungry people, even though they had turned against him and whatnot. And that is a good lesson. That's something that Jesus taught, but you'd never think to pull it out of the Old Testament. But again, that's especially with Moses and the people in the desert, that's what happened. That's what happened all the time. The people just got very angry and turned against God and whatnot. But God said, okay, I'm going to show them that I'm okay. I love them. I'll protect them. So, so we had the manna and the quail, and so these two miracles, we're talking about guidance from God, clearly. And that was the miracle. And both of those, the miracle was that God guided them, and that's what saved them. That's what protected them. So I wanted to just go back to a few things. Some of these things come from Dr. Lumsden, but mainly remember what Jesus taught. What his main message was is the kingdom or the counsel of God here on earth. Remember, he said, God, the kingdom of God is here now, and it's available to you. So in the Old Testament, we see mostly, we had Abraham and his spiritual journey, and then we have Moses with and he is the one, communing with God. But Jesus came along and said, look, everybody is a child of God, and everybody can partake of this counseling if you just turn to him. So Dr. Lumsa, all right, we just go a little bit with this because it is what Jesus taught. So Dr. Lumsa, and in reference to miracles and everything, spiritual man is a child of God, endowed with freedom and tremendous powers. Man has the freedom to make a choice and to change the outer things around him. Man, being a child of God and knowing that God works through him, can do anything. Now, there's that God works through us. And I think that that's something that's difficult for people to understand because, mostly because, the concept of God from the Aramaic is God is spirit and God is love. And therefore, he's not a person, okay? But the love and the spirit, it works through all of us. And so God accomplished getting the people protected when they came out of Israel through Moses. And you find most of the miracles you're going to find, they come from God, and so they are a miracle. But God works through us. And so That's what Dr. Lumsden says. Knowing that we are a child of God, all of us, regardless of your religion, whatever, all of us are children of God. Okay. And we learn and know that God works through us, and therefore we can do anything, according to Dr. Lumsden. Now, but I wanted to go one more thing in terms of the concepts. If you remember, some of you that have been with us, okay, because you, how are we going to get that guidance from God now that we know it's available to us? All right. So prayer, the meaning of prayer is different, okay, than what we're used to. The meaning of prayer, and the word in Aramaic is slotha, means to tune in and listen for the guidance. So when you pray, it's more receiving than sending. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with praying and asking for this, but mainly you're tuning in and you're listening. And why? Because God knows what you need before you even ask. So to me, the Old Testament is very significant to understand the New Testament and Jesus. And so we have two miracles from Moses, and next week we're going to do two more, just to get the background. I think that reading the Old Testament, most people, they just read through it and they say, oh God, it's just once you get into the plagues and all that, it's just, but if you read it with the idea of God is spirit and the spiritual journeys of these people, it's great. To me, it's essential if you're going to understand the New Testament. Okay. All right. And most, but not all, of what we were talking about tonight, and a lot more on the background of these things is in the commentary, Aramaic Light on Exodus through Deuteronomy. We have it on our website with free shipping, but it is on Amazon also. And we appreciate your contributions. Well, they just really help to help us with many things, especially concerning this technology and stuff. All right, so